There are summers that feel like dreams, not because they're filled with extraordinary events or cinematic moments, but because they arrive when your heart is unguarded and quietly starving for something it doesn't yet have a name for. And for Clara, the summer she met Theo was exactly that kind of dream, one so gentle and strange and quietly transformative that she spent the rest of the year convincing herself it had been real. They met in late June, at a bookstore by the lake where the floors creaked with every step and the light filtered through tall, dusty windows like something sacred. He was reading a battered copy of Franny and Zoe, wearing a shirt that looked like it belonged to another decade, and when she asked him whether he thought Salinger's characters were brilliant or insufferable, he smiled in a way that felt like a door opening where there hadn't even been a wall. They spent the next 2 months in a rhythm that didn't feel like falling in love, not in the way movies taught her to expect, with declarations or urgency or fire, but rather like discovering a second language already buried inside her chest, a slow unfolding of silences that matched hers, of glances that didn't ask for anything, of laughter that arrived not to impress, but to belong. Theo was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of person who paid attention to things most people missed, the color of the sky just before it rained, the way her fingers tapped when she was thinking, the fact that she never finished her coffee but always ordered it anyway, and in return, Clara gave him the softest parts of herself, the parts she usually kept hidden beneath wit and hesitation. They kissed only twice, once in the rain, once under stars, and never spoke about what came next. And then, one morning in early September, he disappeared. No message. No call. No explanation. Just absence, vast and immediate, like a door slammed shut in a house that used to breathe with light. At first, she made excuses for him, the way people do when they've let someone into their quietest places. Maybe his phone died, maybe he had to travel, maybe something came up, maybe, until weeks turned to months and the silence grew too large to fill with reasons that still made sense. Her messages, tentative at first, then urgent, then bitter, remained unanswered, and slowly, painfully, she began the work of mourning someone who hadn't died but who also hadn't stayed. Her friends told her to forget him, that maybe he was never serious, that some people just vanish, and that she deserved more than a boy who didn't have the courage to explain his exit, and though she smiled and nodded and even laughed when required, a part of her stayed frozen in that summer, in those long walks and quiet hours and that final kiss that had felt, somehow, like a promise disguised as a moment. Years passed. She moved cities, changed jobs, dated men who were kind and clever and entirely unlike Theo, and yet every time she heard the rain tapping against her window, or passed by a second-hand bookstore, or saw a copy of Franny and Zoe, something inside her paused, not with pain, exactly, but with a question that had never been answered. And then, one cold morning in early spring, while visiting her sister's new apartment near the old part of town, she passed a cafe she didn't recognize, glanced inside for no particular reason, and stopped walking, completely, breathlessly. Because there, seated by the window in a wheelchair, with a blanket across his lap and a hollowed-out stillness behind his once bright eyes, was Theo. Not a memory. Not a ghost. But very much alive. And everything inside her, the grief, the confusion, the unfinished ending she'd folded into silence, surged forward all at once. For several long seconds, or maybe minutes, she couldn't be sure, Clara stood outside the cafe in the wind that carried no warmth, her body motionless but her mind racing through fragments of memories that suddenly no longer belonged to a closed chapter but to something unfinished, something returning not with the gentle nostalgia of longing, but with the jarring weight of reality made visible. Theo didn't see her, not at first. He was staring through the window with that faraway look she had only imagined in dreams, his hands resting still and quiet on the edge of the table, his body thinner than she remembered, and there was a woman beside him, older, maternal, with the same sadness etched into her features that Clara had worn, unknowingly, for years. She thought about walking away. Because there are moments in life when distance feels safer than truth, when unanswered questions hold less danger than the revelations they might unlock, and this was one of them, a moment in which every step forward meant unraveling the version of the past she had carefully kept sealed. But Clara had lived too long inside silence to let it win again. So she stepped inside, her fingers trembling as she gripped the door, the bell above her head chiming softly, unnervingly, like the beginning of a memory trying to become real again, and as she approached, Theo looked up and saw her. And in that instant, a flicker, sharp and fleeting, his eyes widened, not fully, not in the dramatic way she might have imagined, but enough for her to see recognition bloom in the spaces where vacancy had lived just moments before. The woman beside him turned too, curious, cautious, and Clara, her voice barely audible above the static in her head, whispered a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Theo. It felt like stepping into a cathedral, sacred, terrifying, echoing with every emotion she had never been allowed to release. He didn't speak. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out, and Clara saw it then, saw the effort in his posture, the pain beneath his stillness, and the slow, careful tears that welled in his eyes before he turned, ever so slightly, to look at the woman beside him. And the woman, his mother, as Clara would soon learn, stood, gently touched his shoulder, and said with a voice so tired and so kind. "You're Clara, aren't you?" Clara nodded. She couldn't do more than that. They sat together in that small cafe for hours that afternoon, hours that felt like years and seconds at once, as his mother filled in the silence with a story that unraveled everything Clara had believed for so long. The night Theo disappeared, the night she waited for a message that never came, he had been driving back from his uncle's cabin, planning to surprise her with something small and quiet and meaningful, maybe even just a poem or a Polaroid, something that would say "I'm here, I want this," but the rain had been heavy, the road slick, and the truck that swerved into his lane never stopped. He had been found unconscious, barely breathing, with her name on a note in his jacket pocket, not a love letter, not a grand gesture, just a folded piece of paper with her name, her number, and the words, "Don't let me lose this." He had remained in a coma for nearly 9 months, and when he woke, everything had changed, his body, his speech, his memory in pieces, and for a long time, he hadn't remembered the summer, hadn't remembered her. Until 3 months ago, when his therapists noticed a shift, a sudden interest in a book she had once lent him, a recurring dream about waves and someone waiting, always waiting. And now, seeing her, face to face, something in him had reconnected, and he was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, tears slipping from his eyes like the slow melting of a glacier, silent and unstoppable. Clara reached across the table and took his hand. It was thinner than she remembered, colder, unfamiliar in shape but still, somehow, his, and when he squeezed back, just barely, her chest broke open in a way that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with release. They didn't speak much that day. He couldn't yet say much, and she didn't need to hear more than what had already been said through his gaze, through the letter that never reached her, through the years they had both survived with a ghost pressed against their ribs. In the days that followed, she returned, again, and again. Sometimes with books, sometimes with silence, sometimes with nothing but the quiet comfort of presence, and Theo, with each visit, met her a little more than the day before, a word here, a smile there, and once, just once, a laugh that cracked open the air around them like sunlight after too long behind clouds. They didn't ask what this meant. Didn't name it, didn't press it into something fragile like hope, because some stories aren't about starting over, they're about continuing something that refused to end. And maybe, Clara thought as she watched him fall asleep one afternoon, her hand still in his, maybe love doesn't always need to arrive with promises or clarity or timing that makes sense to anyone else. Maybe love is what survives. Through silence. Through absence. Through the long, aching space between goodbye and hello again.